What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Kick-Ass Podcast. We are back here today to take a look at episode 4 of the docuseries Mr. McMahon on Netflix. We are episode 4 of 6, so we are almost through the entirety of the series, at least recap-wise here. Again, our go-to for the recap and the documentation, the sourcing, and all that good stuff is 411mania.com. Robert Leighty Jr. over there, so shout out to him. As always, the link will be in the show notes here if you're watching here on YouTube. So definitely check that out as well. Again, love the site. It's very easy to navigate, so I highly recommend it. And we put it over if need to. So shout out to him and to them for all of the work. But with that being said, I'm gonna just knock out a couple more things and then we'll get right into it. As always, I appreciate you guys for checking out the show here. If you're viewing on YouTube, feel free to like, subscribe, whatever you feel so inclined on doing. If you are listening in the audio world over on Apple or Spotify, whatever, I appreciate that as well. You can follow me on Twitter at kickashpodcast _. You can follow me personally at ASHMANNS. But yeah, with all that out of the way, I do want to mention as well that I, of course, if a lot of you guys that I've seen that have navigated over here, especially during the live feeds, have found me over from Brasswing Media. I do a live show for them Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern, so feel free to join me over there. But obviously, I do content on my own channel here, so feel free to check out whatever. But I appreciate all the support nonetheless, and definitely leave comments if in regards to this episode or anything in the past that I've covered, just with your feedback. I'd love to hear other people's perspectives, any opinions, anything of that nature. So with all that out of the way, we're going to get right into the episode here because, like I said, this one was a little bit heavier, and there's a lot to go through. So starting off, we left off with Vince McMahon screwing Bret Hart at Survivor Series. That brought the Mr. McMahon character to life. And of course, in the article, there's links to go back and check out Robert's previous recaps of the episodes there as well. Vince says we all had favorites as kids, and his favorite was Dr. Jerry Graham, and they show clips of Dr. Jerry Graham as well, which is pretty cool. I love seeing the old footage, and I love that we had access to all of it too. Which obviously we would with Vince being directly involved, but it just hits differently, when they don't have to like recreate certain scenes or just leave it to your imagination when you can actually see it. So I thought that was pretty cool, and throughout the series, obviously, but just stuff like this, especially from like the older days, I appreciate. He being Vince, was drawn to the bleached blonde hair, the strut, and how Graham lit up cigars with $100 bills. Graham would take Vince for rides in his sports car, and Vince said, "Yeah, that's who I wanted to be," which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. In January 2024, Vince McMahon. Oh, there's a graphic, text graphic on the screen. In January 2024, Vince McMahon resigned from WWE after allegations involving sexual misconduct, assault, and trafficking. The majority of the following interviews, including with Vince McMahon, were filmed before the allegations were public. Yeah, so Robert's just reading Robert's take really quick. He says, so that's basically preparing for us all off the wall crap Vince is going to say that will look pretty awful after the allegations came to light. So yeah. And again, I like that they threw that in there as well because it could be very confusing if you're like, WTF, why are they ignoring all of this recent and ongoing things and lawsuits and stuff? It's because it was filmed about 3 years ago now. So 3 years ago at this point. We go back to Montreal where Vince screwed Bret Hart out of the WWF title. Triple H says it was surreal, and Shawn says it caused internal turmoil in the business. The online fans were all over it, and Triple H says those fans should have known nothing about it. Dave Meltzer says there were two sides to every story, but most fans didn't side with Vince. Trish Stratus mentions she is Canadian, so after Montreal, she fucking hated Vince. Yeah, and I wasn't expecting to hear an F-bomb from Vince either. Or from Vince. From Trish. Like, wow. Dave mentions Vince went on to Raw and tried to explain it and came off looking bad. The whole sit-down interview and when he saw the black eye, like they said here, trying to explain it, and then that line came from. Vince of it and decided to use it and turn himself into a character. He always wanted to be a performer, but his dad would not let him. He says when it happened, it felt natural. The Mr. McMahon character was born. They note that Eric Bischoff's on-screen character predated Vince by a little over a year. And then they said, to be fair, Vince was being a heel in Memphis in the 90s on a smaller scale to help Lawler out. So Robert is just adding some context there. Through 1997, WCW was still smashing WWF in the ratings, and now they had Bret Hart coming over. Eric says WCW had a much better roster at the time, and he wanted to dominate and win. He would not have felt bad if WWF went out of business, which, whatever. It sounds harsh, but it is what it is, and that has to be your mindset. And it's just so wild to me too that they never did more and that they didn't capitalize more off of Brett coming over to WCW after everything that happened in Montreal. It's just wild to me, regardless of whose fault it is. It's like, damn, guys, come on. And again, Brett had broken his hand. And I think he had to be out for what, like maybe a month or 6 weeks or something. But still, like you could have brought him on. That could have helped it even more. You could have brought him on TV and almost in a similar fashion to how you did Lex Luger, right? Almost with that shock. The second he's available and the second you get him on contract and you can bring him out there. And again, it's not going to be like the next night, even the week after, but like you could have like really made an impact. The fact that they didn't initially, it was just wild to me. Undertaker says that for years, the WWF was stuck catering to kids and WCW was catering to the 18 to 34 demographic. As we know, it is all about the demo, as Robert says, which, yeah. God, and that, it's so sad I'm going to be out of that demographic soon. Oh, Vince said you have to listen to the audience, and, right, ironic, the irony there. And he could feel there needed to be a change. In comes Bonnie Hammer, Vice President of Original Programming for the USA Network from 1989 to 1998. She knows it was absolute war between WCW and WWF. Vince wanted to be known for pushing the envelope, and we see the famous video where he told the audience he knew they were tired of having their intelligence insulted. Eric scoffed at the notion and figured Vince would go back to what he knew best, essentially characters like Doink. The producer asked Pritchard if there was a moment that birthed the Attitude Era, and he mentions the night Shawn wore bicycle shorts and stuffed the short with a sock. Pritchard notes that Vince was not at the show that night, and Michaels clarifies that it was not a sock, it was gauze. So I'm glad we know that now. Vince called Shawn the next day and told him it was unprofessional and fined him $10,000. Shawn said Vince understood, but told Vince to go. Oh, I'm sorry. Shawn told Vince he understood, keyword there, but told Vince to go back and watch and tell him it wasn't entertaining. That started the conversation that they needed to go from there. He weaseled his way out of the fun, and a few weeks later, Vince pointed to Shawn and said that was the attitude that they needed. The Attitude Era was born, and of course that's debatable, right? Like that specific moment, I'm sure that obviously propelled, but it was already brewing. I don't know if that would be specifically the moment, but whatever. The Attitude Era was born as they got grittier and raw, pun intended, I would say. Triple H says it was a little bit. Oh, Triple H says it was little bits at a time that built up to the era. Cody Rhodes brings up. Thank you, makes sense. Cody Rhodes brings up DX and how they were anti-authority, and that clicks with the fans. Triple H says most of things they were doing, Vince was telling them USA is going to kick them off the air. Eventually, they realized it worked and told them to do it again. We see Triple H talk a woman into flashing her tits in the crowd. It was blurred out even on Netflix, so there's that. In brings Stone Cold. Stone Cold enters the chat, right? It took a bit to get there, but here we go, says Robert. And yeah, finally, episode 4. It's crazy, which makes sense with the chronology of everything, but it's just like, yeah, here's Austin. Steve Austin became the biggest star of the era and either 1A or 1B in WWF history, depending on how, or I guess probably who you ask, rather. They briefly discussed his journey from WCW to being fired and ending up in ECW. Easy for me to say, but he did end up in WCW too. Paul Heyman says ECW was a necessary interruption of the regular sports entertainment industry. Vince calls ECW a wild-ass renegade promotion that attracted a niche audience. It was very unusual. Yeah, unusual. I mean, yeah, that's, I guess, if you're going to sum it up in one word. Vince appreciated the promotion and the promoter behind it, being Paul Heyman, and we see footage of ECW's top moments as Heyman mentions Vince saw ECW as a feeder system into the bigger companies. Paul Heyman knew he wasn't going to have Steve Austin for long, so pretty much was like, here you go, man, here's the kick. kid, probably. Here you go, kid. Here's the mic. Do what you want to do. They skipped over the ringmaster gimmick completely and go to Austin becoming Stone Cold. Austin mentions Triple H was going to win King of the Ring that year, but he was punished for the curtain call. 2 weeks before the show, Vince tells Steve he is going to win the tournament. Austin covers having his lips split open in the match, in the first match rather, against Mark Miro, and go into the hospital for stitches. When he came back, Michael Hayes told him, Austin, that Jake had cut a religious promo to hype their King of the Ring finals match, which obviously triggered thoughts in the Austin 316, or not Austin, but the John 316 promo for Austin. And he was gone. He was gone from the arena the entire night at the hospital getting the stitches done, so he had no idea what happened. Austin wins the King of the Ring, and we get talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, "I just whipped your ass." Amazing. Fucking love it. Vince was not happy as he was worried about how it would play into the Bible Belt, but it was also brilliant. And then here we go. Yeah, I'm so happy he mentioned the bullshit story Robert Leighty is like, here we go with the bullshit story from Pritchard that night. For Pritchard essentially saying the next night Austin 3:16 signs were all over the place. And it's not. Like, and he even mentions right here, the Austin couldn't even get off the pre-show at SummerSlam 2 months later. And like, you would think, and they've done it in regards to a couple documentaries. The next time they show, like, they'll show the Austin 3:16 promo at King of the Ring, and then immediately transition over to just a sea of Austin 3:16 signs and arenas everywhere. And it did not happen that quick. Obviously, it ended up happening, but not night and day. Like, not immediately after. So I'm glad that he referenced that as well, because I was going to bring it up too. But Austin brings up WCW beating their ass in the ratings, and early on he understood it as Nitro was the better show. Things started to change in 97. They were wondering if someone was paying off the people doing the ratings because they knew they had the better show up at that point, and were just perplexed as to how WCW was still kicking their ass. Then we jump to 1998 as Vince has the idea to bring in Mike Tyson into the promotion. Eric says he got a call that WWF was bringing in Tyson, and Eric said he got uncocky real fast. They credit Shane McMahon with helping to get Tyson involved with the WWF. Shane mentions Tyson had gotten out of prison 3 years earlier, and we go to some archive footage of someone asking Stephanie in 2013 if there was a risk bringing in Tyson due to his baggage. And Stephanie says, quote, "He hadn't been arrested for rape yet, though. When did he do that?" He had? Oh, man. She had no idea. Bless her heart. Bob Costas notes that Mike Tyson may not have been universally loved at that point, or may not be universally loved now, but he is in a better place than his opinion of him back in 1998. Pritchard says that Tyson being on pay-per-view was a big deal, and they got him to be the special ref at WrestleMania 14 between Austin and Michaels, which is so wild. Like, when I sat down to do this, obviously to do this episode, I was setting up everything. I was like, oh my god, like I'm wearing the shirt from WrestleMania 14. Like, I got this at like Walmart or some shit. But I was like, what are the freaking odds, bro? Like, come on. Funny. So fast forward to WrestleMania 14. It's so crazy. Austin mentions Shawn had a real bad back and it made the match forgettable. Austin said he's never been a fan of that match and says it wasn't any good. Vince told Austin not to worry about that as the real work started now. Eric says that Mr. McMahon, or the Mr. McMahon character, became a real thing after the Tyson story ended. The McMahon-Austin rivalry had just started after Austin won the WWF title. Triple H says it was a way to blur the lines between reality and fiction, and it was a billionaire against the anti-system hero, and they were perfect for each other, which they really were. Austin notes he is a heel in any other era, but he brought the gray area into the business, which he did. And a lot of people don't even really mention that. They mention NWO, which they were the ones who originated, but Austin really had a heavy hand in that as well for blurring the lines in regards to like good guys and bad guys. Tony Atlas says, in his day, there was a good guy and a bad guy, and Vince had bad guys and worse guys. The fans didn't want to see good guys anymore, and he mentions the movies with anti-heroes and violent video games. Vince says they try to follow trends, and those days were like the Wild West. So, yeah, and to be fair, especially in the 90s, man, like, completely different scene. The fans loved seeing someone beat the crap out of their boss. Austin says Vince is easy to hate. fair, especially now. But also easy to love. Pritchard says Vince is easy to hate and brings up the McMahon power walk. Mr. McMahon became the most hated character in the history of the business. Facts. Vince says he grew up poor and rich people thought that they were better than him. That made him rather, dislike rich people, and he used that for the Mr. McMahon character. He says he was good at fighting as a kid and he would win by cheating. He didn't care. People accused him of not fighting fair. Rich people would try to intimidate you. It was easy for me to get into that character as I knew all the things I didn't like. End quote. Austin notes Vince can manipulate a crowd as well as anyone, and Vince loved getting heat and embraced it. Austin and Vince both note that emotion sells tickets, and that emotion is when you know you have the audience, which, again, facts. Vince says he shares no traits with the Mr. McMahon character. Okay, buddy. Shane says Mr. McMahon is an extension of Vince, but blown way out of proportion. Hogan says they are the same person, and Sean says there's not much difference. Pritchard says Mr. McMahon is Vince, no matter if he tries to say otherwise. Which, yeah, the promos were cut on camera. Okay, it's a little okay. The promos were cut on camera were the way he would yell at Pritchard and others, and Vince would tell them that he would never talk to them like that. So essentially, the promos that we would see on screen is how he acts behind the scene, which is wild. Not surprising. It's just, one of those things. The producers run the story back to Vince, and he laughs. He says he is passionate about the business and probably can get out of bounds a bit. Austin says the best characters are those that are themselves, with the volume turned way up. Vince says, I'm not that guy, and it bothered him that people saw him that way, which, whatever, bro. Come on. Dave Meltzer says you can make the argument that Austin McMahon was the greatest feud of wrestling history. It was the feud that finally turned the tide. It ended Nitro's 83-week streak. Eric says Vince took their formula and did it better. He says DX was a derivative of the NWO, and Mr. McMahon was a derivative of NWO Eric Bischoff. He says McMahon did it better, but should admit Eric did it first. Back to Vince, who says Eric did it first, but he didn't play it as well, so good for him. Eric admits that Vince would do whatever he needed to do to win the fight, and admits that the NWO angle wasn't fresh anymore, and WWF was giving the fans something new. Dave says Bischoff's mistake was thinking he could coast while ahead, which, that's a fair point. He says Vince got lucky as Austin was an incredible success, and then came The Rock, which, talk about a double whammy. In comes The Rock, and he goes over his family history. The High Chief was his grandfather, and he put Samoa on the map. He wrestled for Vince Sr., then his father, Rocky Johnson, worked for Vince Sr., and with Tony Atlas became the first African Americans to win the tag team titles. The Rock came in as Rocky Maivia, and Pritchard admits they shoved him down the throats of the fans. They hated him. Vince says no matter how hard they worked, or The Rock worked rather, the fans started booing him. The fans finally started to love The Rock when he turned heel and started yelling at them. Which is just the irony is so funny. And us fans. The Rock discusses the Nation of Domination and how he told Vince he wanted to speak up and explain why he turned. The Rock says that moment was a shift for him, and things started to cook and cook. Well, I guess cook nowadays, right? But click. Survivor Series 1998, The Rock wins the WWF title for the first time and tells Vince it's a big deal as he is the first man of color to win the WWF title. Vince said, I know, but I don't see color. Vince says he doesn't care about color and only cares if you can draw money. Tony Atlas says it's business and not racism. He doesn't see black or white. He only sees green, is what he's saying in regards to Vince, which is what it is. It's not my place to comment on, really. So yeah, I'm not a fan, though, to say the least, of that comment. But yeah, we get footage of the crazy shit they did in the Attitude Era. Pritchard says it was a movement as Austin 316, DX, and The Rock merchandise were everywhere. Meltzer notes the influence was all over pop culture. Rock hosted SNL, Saturday Night Live, and got to speak at the Republican National Convention, which is funny. Dave says the WWE is making more money today, but the peak of their popularity was the Attitude Era. The program was hot, making all kinds of money, but morally, what they were doing was getting attacked. Triple H says it was a lot of fun, and they were doing what they thought would get the biggest reactions. They were given a lot of freedom, and he wonders how they got away with a lot of the stuff. And then we see X-Pac and blackface, and Godfather with his hose. Yeah, yeah. Enter Phil Mushnick in the chat because, of course, and he continued his newspaper crusade against the WWF. He says WWF pushed what they could do for all it's worth and kept going later on. Vince says it was lower than what they did in the past, but it was still family friendly. More great editing, as Vince says, nobody was killed, and they cut to The Rock being locked in a casket and Triple H beating it with a sledgehammer. Vince says nobody was raped. Right, I don't know what words we can say and we can't say, but Vince says nobody was raped, and we cut to Vince in the ring. Come on out, you rapist, which was one of the quotes that he had said. There was no use of knives or guns, and then yeah, Robert inserted, can I interest you in Pillman 9mm and choppy your pee? Yeah. Yeah. Um yeah, so pretty much it was not family friendly. And people were getting upset because kids were getting in trouble in school and pretty much mimicking what they were watching on TV. Enter bikini contests, things like that. Then we bring in Sable, and pretty much they said she knew what her role was. Trish says Sable showed off her athleticism and it got overlooked. She mentioned you had Howard Stern, Jerry Springer, and Girls Gone Wild. WWF was just going where everyone else had already went. He says bra and panty matches wouldn't work today, but that was a different time. They know Vince is always a product of his time, and he says the highest rated segments they had were often the women. We see Sable tearing off her top with the hand painted bikini, and Lawler's reaction. Oh, and he says Lawler's reaction always kills him. Yeah, more things. Half naked women. Boss man being hung. Yeah. Triple H says they went way over the line and questions who was worse, the guy who did it or the people who enjoyed it. So, okay, it's our fault. Which, I mean, yeah, in a way, but whatever. And here comes Owen Hart. Vince says he met with Owen after Montreal and asked Owen what he wanted to do, and Owen told Vince he wanted to stay. That seems hard to believe, but when looking online, it seems like Owen did want to stay and did negotiate with Vince. Brett says that when he went to WCW and Owen stayed, nothing was the same. Brett says he felt Owen though. Brett says he felt Owen though he was mad at him. Okay, I guess he understands, but he was mad at him. Okay. Brett thinks they took shots and sabotaged Owen's career to get back at him. Vince laughs at that notion and says that's Brett's ego talking. Says, quote, we don't care about you. You left. We are trying to make Owen a star. Type of vibe. May 23rd, 1993. Jesus Lord. May 23rd, 1999. Easy for me to say, right? Bruce Pritchard enters right here, says that was Owen, and he starts to break down. They were live and through to a pre-taped interview of Owen as the Blue Blazer. He was set to make his entrance from the rafters of the building. Vince notes they had done the entrance previously earlier in the day, and Pritchard said that he could hear someone yelling. Okay, kind of pause there. Pritchard noted that he could hear someone yelling that was Owen in the ring, and he was wondering what the hell he was doing when Owen fell. So tragic, man. I can't even fucking imagine. Bret Hart was on a flight and could feel something overcome him, and he knew something bad had happened. JR had the difficult task of trying to explain to viewers at home that Owen had fell, and what is happening is not part of the show. Vince thanks God that for the audience not being able to really see it, as it was during a time when the ring lights were very low, so the video package on the screen could show better. Which, yeah, I mean, yeah. When the lights came up, they saw Owen in the ring and medical personnel working on him. Then we get the chilling still photo of Owen in the ring with someone doing a chest compression on him. Vince wondered if Owen could be alive. Surely he could be. Vince says Lawler was in the ring and came back as he said he thinks Owen is dead. Bruce couldn't believe it. A police officer pulled Vince to the side and let him know that Owen was dead. JR had to make the announcement to let everyone know at home. I'm gonna stop right there really quick. Everyone, I'm sure, depending on how old you are, I guess. But I would imagine the majority of people watching a channel like this know by now Of course, Owen, like they mentioned, he was the Blue Blazer character, and he was set to make his entrance pretty much like just like descending from the top of the arena on a cable, and the cable itself, pretty much like the clip that holds the cable together, it's like a release clip. It was broken, and when Owen, put his body weight on it, just fell from the top and crashed on in the ring, pretty much like almost on the corner. He just missed the turnbuckle, I believe. Yeah, he just missed the turnbuckle. The referee was actually standing in the corner, I believe. I forget which referee it was. And I think he landed like right on right near the apron side. So yeah, it's I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't even imagine being a fan there, being someone who works there, being JR, being the king, having to go in the ring and then just, but especially being JR, having to talk about it, just being anyone there that night. Like, yeah, it's just, you, you just can't imagine. Like, I don't know, man. It just kind of leaves you speechless. And, yeah, it's not surprising that Martha Hart would never want anything else to do with WWE. So I don't blame her one bit. Vince says the decision to continue the show was his. If the crowd had seen what happened, there was no question the show would have stopped. Bruce says they didn't announce it to the live house because they didn't think it was the right thing to do. Vince said the people came to see a show, they didn't come to see someone die. Come on, bro. As a businessman, he made the decision to continue the show, and poor Jeff Jarrett had to cut a promo while nearly in tears. Dave says they should never continue the show. No, no shit. Um, Yeah, Jeff Jarrett was extremely close with Owen Hart, obviously. So he was just in shambles. Yeah. Vince says there was a lot of negative comments about he handled things. Yeah, no shit. Again, we see archive footage of Brett on a talk show saying he knows Owen's body was wheeled by wrestlers who were pushed to go to the ring to continue the show. Vince says that naturally Brett is going to feel like a brother should, and he had every right to say everything negative about the company. We hear Brett's famous line where he questions what Vince would have done if Shane had splattered on the mat. Vince says to forget Shane, and if he had splattered on the mat, he would want out of there so the show could continue. Which shit like that, like there's no I don't know. There's no need for any comparison from Vince's side, like and like, oh, if that was me, like come on, bro, come on. We see video from Owen's funeral. Brett says it was really hard to take at the time as the thought crossed his mind that they murdered Owen to get back at Brett. Which, I mean, Vince is a lot of things allegedly. But I mean that's strong, Owen's wife files a lawsuit, and Vince says they settled but found out but they knew all along it wasn't our fault. He says the apparatus, oh, here we go. The apparatus they were using was defective, and they knew it was defective. They sued the manufacturer. Brett said the police investigated for a long time and called him to let him know they found nothing criminal and it was just a horrible accident. Brett accepted that, and in his heart, he forgave Vince. His issues with Vince were on a professional level and not a personal one, which is big, I mean, I'm sure there's probably still something in there that festers, but to even be able to verbalize saying that he forgives Vince for that is a big deal. Nothing was learned as they continue to push the envelope, and we of course get Foley's fall in the Hell in a Cell, which happened about a year earlier. They knew they couldn't keep raising the bar at that point, and enough is enough. We close with highlights of things to come in the last image, and the last image is Benoit crying while being presented the world title, and then the crime scene. In 2000, and these are the graphics for the quotes at the end of the episode. In 2000, Martha Hart settled her lawsuit against WWE. In 2003, WWE settled its lawsuit against the manufacturer of the harness used in Owen's stunt. All right, guys. going through his notes here, and Robert closes the article by saying this was going along like the previous episode where it was mainly focusing on what Vince was doing in the ring and to help compete against WCW, and then the moral issues of the Attitude Era. They touched on all major points that needed to be mentioned as far as the Monday Night War and Vince turning the tide. Then things took a turn with the talk of the way with the women, or I'm sorry, with the talk of the way the women were treated, and then of course the absolute gut punch when they brought up Owen. Robert continues to applaud the producer sitting across from Vince as he's asking Vince about the claims made against him and pushing back when Vince doesn't give an answer, and that seems to make sense, or that seems to make sense rather, which I couldn't agree more. Props to that producer. The editing has been fun too at times as they take what Vince says and either have someone giving an opposite opinion or show what was happening in his company to contradict him, which is very true. What is crazy is there is so much stuff that has happened under Vince's watch, you nearly forget what is coming, and then, oh, it's Owen's death, and then the next is the Benoit murder suicide. I don't know what words I can say. I'm sorry. As posters here have mentioned, if you are an online wrestling fan that has been through all this, you aren't learning much new. With that said, it's still captivating to watch. Yeah, and he just says that he's a fan of the documentary, and which I'm a big fan of documentaries as well. But yeah, and then that wraps up episode 4, and then of course moving on to episode 5 is going to be a look at the Benoit situation, which that's going to be tough as well, for much different reasons, obviously, but still very tragic. That one I'm probably going to have a little bit more opinions on because I watched a little bit more true crime, and that was and I'm oddly intrigued with like people's brains and why people do the things they do, and things like that. So I think I'll probably have a little bit more maybe of my personal opinions in that one. So just FYI and heads up on that. But again, as always, this before I wrap up, thank you again to Robert Leighty Jr. and 411 Mania for the transcription here. And of course, I'll put the link, like I said before, in the comments below. Or I'm sorry, in the show notes rather. Feel free to leave comments if you watched episode 4, what your thoughts were on how Vince reacted to the Owen situation. I will say I'm happy they brought it up, which how can you not, right? But I can definitely see them bringing it up and Vince saying no comment, or I don't want to talk about that, or that's the past, or whatever Vinceism he would say to that. But I'm glad that whether you like what he had to say or not, I'm glad that he actually addressed it and spoke about it. Just because just to hear, I mean, not today, but as recent as of a few years ago, what his thoughts were in the situation. A couple comments and lines that he had were kind of crass, but that's just my opinion. But it's not really surprising when you take a look at the grand scheme of everything. Again, the next episode is going to dive into the Benoit situation, and we'll get more opinions on that. And then Christopher Nowinski is actually in that episode as well, which I respect him so much. I follow him on Twitter and his foundation for CTE. I think it's just really fascinating. And we'll get into this a little bit more, obviously, in the next episode. But with all the negative things that you could say about Vince and things that he's done in the past, I will give him credit for embracing the study that Christopher Nowinski and his foundation started doing at that time frame, and the research that they wanted to do on Chris Benoit's brain, and Vince and WWE in return rather being willing and very eager to find answers and to help with the research, and Nowinski even references that himself in episode 5. So I'm looking forward to, well, not looking forward to, because it's a really fucked up situation, but we'll be talking about that a lot more in episode 5 when we go over it specifically. But as always, guys, thank you so much for hanging around and checking out the video here. Feel free to follow on Twitter at @kickashpodcast_. You can follow me personally at ASHMANNS. Feel free to subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff on YouTube. Or if you're just listening to the audio version on Apple or Spotify, I appreciate that as well. But until next time, guys, thank you so much. And if you're in the Florida area, like myself, please be safe out there, guys. It's going to be a rough week coming up. The Hurricane Milton is supposed to touch down in Wednesday night, early morning Thursday time frame. So please be safe out there. Yeah, do what you need to do for you and yours. Work will be there, and if not, fuck them. You know what I mean? If you need support, follow me on Twitter. Reach out to me on Twitter. I'm in the Orlando area, so if there's anyone in this area, can't do it so much. I don't have so much space, but we can find a way to make it work. You know what I mean? So stay safe out there, everyone, and until next time, take care and enjoy some wrestling, guys. Talk to you later.